Greetings, Anonymous here. Welcome to Terra Prime Live. We've got a great panel here today. We're going to be discussing the history of sabering. Let's kind of just go through here. Our guest of honor is a man that, if you're in this community for any length of time, you'll probably have come across some of his posts elsewhere. He is kind of like the scribe, the as Craig called him, the receipt keeper on everybody. Greg Ember, how are you doing, Greg?
Hello. Happy to be here.
All right, very good. So we're going to be checking in with him about where all of this stuff kind of, how far the tentacles then reach. Also joining us is Ben Judkins, our resident scholar, historian on lightsabers, and apprentice here at TPLA. How you doing, Ben?
Doing great. Looking forward to today's discussion.
Yep, it's going to be a good one. And we've got Craig and Jared, or Nero, and Wheelos. How you guys doing?
Doing fine.
Doing good.
All right. So let's get into it. Sabering. I'll get some kind of definitions out. First of all, when I say sabering, I mean groups of people getting together to play around with these lightsabers, and that kind of thing. So we've got, obviously we've got a lot of there may have been some starts and some stops in in the whole history as we're talking about it. We've got the inventions of different types of saber. I know, and I'll show this here. The ones that I remember in the beginning here, and I'll just bring this up, is these. The good old flashlight Star Wars lightsabers, which of course were fun and all, but let me get another one up here. This is one that is pretty cool. The first knockoff lightsaber, the Force Beam. Oh yeah, stylish. So, and I think then the Kenner one here that I've got was the one with the inflatable blade. This one is a classic as well here. There we go. So yeah, you'd have a little inflatable blade, kind of like an air mattress material, vinyl, and you'd whack each other with it, and the thing would pop almost immediately. So anyway, so obviously those are probably not suitable for any type of activity that we like to do together. I could be wrong. We'll check in with Greg on that one to see if I would love to have seen a group with those lightsabers. That would have been great.
I've been looking.
You've been looking, yeah. We have the suspicion that there's some out there. But so I've always kind of, like, as I've been looking into it, and we came on the scene around 2012, so I don't know exactly where in the whole timeline, probably somewhere in the middle, that is, but it seems to coincide with the invention or sale of the FX sabers, or the kind of real costume, and movie type hilts, and then as people started getting into the cosplay and all that kind of thing, so I probably, that's how I've been kind of like seeing it. Greg, is that probably about right as far as when this kind of stuff all started?
Well, I really think that's when it started taking off. But there's definitely some evidence that there were various clubs in existence prior to that. It really just kind of depends on how you're defining things.
Right.
So one of my favorite examples of this is there's a group in Russia. There's actually at least a dozen groups in Russia. One of them claims to have started these Master Force FX lightsabers. I mean, they start coming onto the scene like 2008. So when you're seeing these clubs that are like, Russia has this club that started in 2003, and since dissolved, and other people went to other clubs, or the clubs changed their name. So like they were in the woods training with broomsticks that were painted red and painted green, and they fixed maybe some lathe wood to act as the hilt, and just basically, but more than just boffer fighting. I mean, they were training with techniques, actual sword techniques, or stage combat techniques, depending on which kind of club they were. But yeah, like right around when the master replicas really start selling is when we start seeing a whole bunch of clubs explode out of nowhere. And one of them's the one that Greg hails from originally.
Yes. Yep. Yes, the New York scene was definitely like the epicenter. It had, the premier club there, and Saber Wars. And Saber Wars was probably like the the epicenter for the virus.
So, you start talking to clubs around the world, and some of them will say, well, we started before then, or this, we never even heard of them until we were going. But as far as the American scene is concerned, the New York scene really helped kickstart everything. And so, like, you can't just wave away their influence. It just happened like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, to jump in. So because no one was writing any of this shit down because they were, I apologize for cursing. No one was really writing any of this down because we were all nerds just playing around with glow sticks at the beginning. Like, none of us actually thought that this would go on 10 years. No one knew this was going to go on 10 months, let alone 10 years. So, as was established, we've been playing with lightsabers since the first movie came out, but it didn't kick off until Force Effects, and that's when you start seeing these little groups of friends get together and start forming it. New York Jedi is the first one to make an impact, if not the first group, period. I know that very quickly thereafter there was one in LA. I know about a year or two after New York Jedi, people would learn from them and then splinter off into the East Coast. Like, you'd have groups in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Actually, that's where me and Greg met. It's about 50% spontaneous invention and 50% someone had an idea, people came to it, and it spread, as Chad said, very much like a virus.
Yeah, the way all these different clubs intertwined and intermingled and influenced each other is really kind of fascinating to look at after the fact. Now that happened, tracing some of these ideas back and forth around the world has been one of the things that drove me towards a lot of research into this. My name is Greg. On various Saber forums, like as the classic Saber Wars or saberforum.com, fxsabers.com, I am known as Stiletto. That's my code name, whatever. So you may have seen some posts from me to that effect, or I'm like trying to dig in and find out, okay, well, here's this club in Pensacola I never heard of, but that's great. You guys are out there doing what you do. And did you hear about any of these other clubs? No? Okay, well then great. You spontaneously burst into being, and now you're doing your own thing. So I'm just gonna make a note of it here, and we'll see where things are in a couple years. And some of these clubs is like a couple years later, well, things happened, and now we've moved on with our lives. And other clubs like New York Jedi, they lasted, their endurance for how long the duration of their club was is probably one of the records out there.
Yeah. I think it was us and Ludo Sport.
Yeah. I know they're out there too. But yeah, like you can trace the origins of the scene to 2003, 2005. There's a club in Italy that no longer exists. That was called, I think it was just called Jedi Knight Fight Club. And they had some really amazing talent. They did a major con in their area, which was called Luca, and they performed at that. They did a recreation of one of the fights from episode 3. They did the big climactic battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan in accurate costumes, and they went faster than they did it in the movies by a long shot. Any type of extended scene, they were really they really hit that speed so fast. It's hard to believe, and the video is still out there on YouTube. But then, yeah, and that's happening in like 2005, right when New York's starting to take off. And then a couple years later, they're just gone. Now, you talk to some of the guys in Ludo Sport, like I know you guys have had the founder of Ludo, or one of the founders of Ludo, on here before, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, I knew those guys," but they never, they split up and went their different ways. You can look at Southeast Asia. The Southeast Asia Saber scene is another one of the. It's lasted for over 10 years, and it's they can point at clubs in the Philippines that were getting started right around the same time as New York Jedi. Now, us as Americans, we were ignorant that all this was going on, and the internet was, I mean, it wasn't in its infancy, but we weren't checking each other out. We weren't going and saying, "Oh, what's going on over here?" At that time, we were really more focused on our own stuff that we needed to deal with. And it's really only later that we're discovering now that, there was a whole bunch of things going on simultaneously. But yeah, here in the United States, the influence of the New York scene was pretty palpable.
Yeah, and I think it still continues today. Even in a kind of a lower sense, so many, like you said, so many groups started by splintering off from New York Jedi, or being on Saber Wars and getting into the whole thing,
or just seeing videos and going, "I could do that."
Yeah. Actually, and that's also the other thing we should probably mention as being one of the things to kickstart the Saber community, or Sabering in general, was the rise of social media. Without Facebook, without YouTube, most of us wouldn't have even known this was going on. A lot of people have contacted, New York Jedi, Rogue Alliance, Empire Saber Guild, the New York scene, past and present, and basically gone, "I saw your videos. Where can I do this?" Hell, we get messages on a weekly basis at TPLA asking the same thing. "I see your videos. Where can I learn?" And without that, I don't think people would just assume that it's just them and their friends.
Yeah.
And seeing other people do that across the world changes things and makes it more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and obviously we wouldn't exist without YouTube. That's our major, outlet and everything. But the Saber Wars or FX forums or any of those places where people are getting together, and we've had most of these people on the show in the past. We've had the guys from Fight Saber on a couple of times. So the Southeast Asian scene, which is just, I mean, it's just huge. Everything seems to be like high octane over there. So it's pretty pretty obvious that the same thing is true with the Saber scene, and yeah, I mean, we just got we've got a huge diversity, kind of this. Now, I will say this one thing from my experience. Now, we came in 2012, which is about, Greg, what's in the scope of the main thing that we're talking about here, where does that place us?
Yeah, so like I'm not scientific about it yet. Hi, Ben. But yeah, I tend to think of this as kind of like there's like waves of it. There's a wave of new clubs, and then it kind of dies back for a little, and then there's the next wave. So when you hit 2012, it's like probably the third wave at that point.
Right.
It's usually like I don't see a pattern yet, but that's a very good question. Do the waves coincide with the movies at all? I haven't done that research yet. I'm looking forward to finding out if that's what's happening. I expect there's something like that going on, but it could be a bunch of other things that are influencing that. Just finding out what various clubs' start dates are is ridiculous, because you're looking at various clubs keeping tally of how they do things in different ways. And of course, to help build the ego of the club, they start looking at, oh, okay, but all right, that was our first practice, but when did we first get the idea that we were going to have a practice? They keep pushing the date back as far as they possibly can. A bunch of clubs do that. So getting something that's like accurate, that you can measure and say, okay, well, they first started meeting regularly on this date is, it's difficult. But I do try and get that information. So, I've generated this enormous list of clubs in 2012. And that list has really not seen any updates from myself, because I wanted it to be a curated thing. Since then, I fully expected somebody would step into the gap, and at the moment, nobody has that I've seen. So, getting this information on these clubs and their start date, and I try and get that information there, it's hard to get. So I would say right now, the best of my ability, that 2012's like the third wave of new clubs, but at the moment, I really can't say.
Right. Yeah. So, because when we came on, there were still there were people like, there's the West Coast, there's an East Coast type of thing. We had Golden Gate Nights out west, with and then you had the whole before, and this goes to your social media thing and YouTube thing. You had the DVDs that started that tried to get off the ground. There's the Spin DVDs, and then the NC, the Nova Star DVDs that were being sold for a while, and that seemed to already have died down when I came on. Now I just, as far as where I start tallying from, I tally from my first video that I uploaded. You know, so whatever the YouTube channel says is our inception date is what I'm going by. Just for your records, Greg.
Okay.
But anyway, yes. Now, one thing that's interesting that I found interesting, at least in my experience, is since I've come into the thing, there have been a much larger influx of people from other martial arts and other things. Because when I came on, there were very few people that had a formal martial arts training doing any of this stuff. And one of the reasons that I enjoyed it, and we'll turn it over here to Ben here in a second, because you wrote an article about this, is that for a fleeting moment, it seemed to be distinct and different from the world of martial arts that I was coming from. There seemed to be a bigger sense of community and all that, and there is to a certain extent. We are all bound by one thing. However, as with anything, politics is always going to get involved, and people are going to fall out with each other and all of that. So that aside, on the other hand, we TPLA has always had the impetus of saying, and this is what me and Matt were thinking about when we started all of this stuff, is how do we get people from different arts to come and play together? Because when we started this, we actually started Sword Lab back in 2010. There wasn't any arenas where people from Japanese arts and European arts were coming together and you know, sparring and stuff like that. HEMA, to a certain extent, has allowed that to happen. I don't think there's anything formal as far as a mixed martial arts of weapons yet, but anyway. But yeah, I've noticed that, and of course, the shift from choreography to sparring and to sporting type of things too seems to have been kind of accelerating. But Ben, there's obviously parallels between our community and between the martial arts community and what's happening here. I know I've found parallels with certain things that I'm studying now too. We're going to chalk some of that up to confirmation bias, but it's because I'm so thinking about that kind of stuff. But anyway, you know, can you speak on that, like some of those issues, because you've studied that?
Yeah, I think that the relationship between, you know, changes that we see in the martial arts community and the emergence of lightsaber combat as a massive phenomenon is very interesting. I mean, obviously, in terms of HEMA, you know, people have been playing around with historical swords since like the 19th century, but, you know, HEMA really started to grow fast at the same time that we see growth in other sorts of weapons training, right? You know, lightsaber is coming on at the same point in time in which a lot of people are looking at Chinese manuals and saying, hey, we can begin to recreate this. So there seems to be this push to recreate lost weapon systems, recreate lost martial arts that we're seeing all over the martial arts world. At about the same time that people are also saying, I wonder if we could create something like, you know, a Jedi martial art, you know, or a Star Trek-based martial art, right? So, you know, there are a couple ways to look at this history, right? One is our inside history, like who came first or what are the progressions of groups. But then you can also look at the history in terms of, yeah, how do we fit into the larger popular culture discussion about combat and martial arts, which I think is really interesting. And for what it's worth, I think that politically the situation in lightsaber combat actually is pretty open. It might depend on where you're coming from in the martial arts world, but man, the political fights I see in the lightsaber combat world is as unpleasant as they can be. Do not hold a candle to what I see in the Wing Chun world, which is just like fratricidal beyond imagining sometimes. So I still find it a very welcome relief, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and inside, you know, the school that, you know, I'm working with, you know, with Anthony, and here you do have a situation where you have people from different martial arts backgrounds that are coming together and are working very effectively, right? So in that sense, I think we actually have solved, you know, the political issue. We can get people from all different parts of the martial arts world involved in lightsaber, but then sometimes the lightsaber groups decide they want to do different things, right? You know, what are you going to do about that?
Sure, and that's the thing. I mean, if we're successful in what we're doing, we're going to create a new martial art, new martial sport, whatever you want to call it. And with that is going to come all of that other stuff. You know, HEMA's finding that out right now. I think that there's starting to be these arguments coming that coming from the Chinese martial arts. It's like, oh, this thing again. You know, like these arguments over lineage, and you know, because that's ad nauseum in the Chinese martial arts.
Yeah. You're like, don't even go there, guys. We've done this for the last 100 years. This is not going to be productive.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Just skip this past this little stage, right? It's not, you know.
And it does raise these, you know, I think kind of fascinating questions when we ask, what is the major impetus in the development of lightsaber combat? You know, so we've got very early groups like New York Jedi, and we have, you know, the story of the 2005 Greenwich Village Halloween Parade, you know, which is all well and good, and, you know, it's documented and it's true. But you also can't escape the fact that, well, there's this thing called Lucasfilm that's spending tens of millions of dollars a year on advertising, right? They're just pumping tens of millions of dollars a year into advertising this, and they're creating replica lightsabers, and then they're commissioning rogue academics to write invented histories and get them published and get those invented histories into video games, right? So there's a strong push. So on the one hand, I could say, yeah, you know, we could explain a lot about the timing of this through purely commercial mechanisms. They have a series of movies. They want to produce the movies. You know, we're kind of riding that wave. But then on the other hand, you find yourself saying, yeah, but you know, Lucasfilm was not spending tens of millions of dollars a year to promote Chinese historical swordsmanship. And that's happening at the same time too.
Right.
Right. So there are some actual paradoxes here. You know, we have a history, but it's overdetermined. It's coming at a lot of different angles, all very fast, all at once. And so it raises some interesting questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, you had an interesting question about a lot of the stuff that I know a lot of our viewers are going to want to ask about the Canon forms.
Yeah, it's something that I think we discuss a lot, but we don't discuss it in front of other people a lot, so this is a good place for it. The question that I asked, I'm just going to read it off the screen because I don't want to mess it up, because I think I wrote it pretty well. Should we base a martial art on the canon styles or forms given to us, or are we responsible for developing a system? And I asked that coming from a place very much like our leader, Chad, who I'm a traditional martial artist. I've been in the martial arts community for 25 years now, and I look at the forms that are given to us by Canon, and to me, they're a writing utensil. They're a tool that's being used. Like if you read the Revenge of the Sith novelization, during the fight with Dooku in the beginning, they talk about how Obi-Wan and Anakin switched their forms in the middle of the battle because they were using their weaker versions to throw Dooku off and make him overconfident, and then they switched to their strong forms and they beat him. And that's how they win that fight in the book, which you can't put on a screen because that's all upstairs. So if it's a writing tool, do we wrap a martial art around that and try to make it work, where I personally don't think it's really a functional physical tool as it is a writing tool, or do we try to extrapolate and say, all right, this is nice, but we're going to take what works and we're going to disregard everything else? What's the responsibility of the community? Do we make our own, or do we force the forms to work?
Well, I think I'll take it and then see what Ben and
Yeah, pass it down the line.
For me, it's like, I agree. The forums as they exist in Legends or the EU or whatever you want to call it, to be quite honest, from Marshall's standpoint, they're, and we've said this in discussions before, they're a little stupid. They don't work in reality. That's not the way fighting and warfare and violence is. Those are romantic notions. These are, you know, things that are good for game mechanics and and stuff like that in video games. The reason I use them, and we're doing them here, it is in the names and all that kind of stuff, is I'm just trying to get touchstones that we can all come together on. Right, we all, this is something that we can all share. I don't really think that you need to follow those forms. You could, completely make up something else, and to a certain extent, you'll see I'm going to start trying to move away from that kind of thing anyway too. So. I think the sky's the limit. I don't think we have necessarily any responsibility to the fictional forms in any way. I don't know. How about you? What about you, Greg? Do you think?
Well, I'm actually in one of the choreography clubs, and I've pretty much always have been. I've explored other. Like there's a HEMA club that's in my area. I've joined in on that and have friends who do that on a regular basis. But what I still spend all my time on is a choreography club. So, for us to go back and look at like the 7 forms, now I'm a 7 forms enthusiast when I have the time. And right now, I don't have as much time as I'd like to pursue that. But if I had as much time as I wanted, things like looking at the movies and go, that was an entertaining fight. Can I pull stuff out of that and reuse it? And could I give it a name from the EU? Sure. And would fellow fans who are in my club and be excited by that? You better believe they'd be excited by that. So that's something that the choreography clubs look at and go, well, it was made to entertain people. We're entertainers. There's elements that, somebody with no martial arts skill and no choreography skill goes, well, I can take that little bit there and steal it and see if it'll other people in the audience will recognize it and go, oh, that's clearly a Star Wars move. And you can say, oh, yes, that was the move that Count Dooku used when he was fighting Anakin in Episode 2. And so you can draw all these connections to that and artistically, if that's what you want to do. On the other hand, sorts of things, from classic martial arts movies to video game mechanics to whatever we can reproduce in the real world from the people who have the skill and the talent, or the people who are just gifted mimics, bring that together. So, 7 forms for me, I'm reading descriptions of them and go, oh, that's nice. Can I do something like that in the real world? Maybe. I'll make use of that. Can we teach that to others? Sure, why not? So we see things like General Sun's Shi Cho, which was based off of, a martial arts form that he knew. I've actually shown that to Chinese and Japanese martial artists, and they go, oh yeah, that's this particular form, which I can't even remember the names of right now. and they say, oh, it's clearly based on that. And yeah, I'm sure one of you guys know the answer to that. But to the regular fan, they're going, oh, well, that's clearly Shi Cho. And you see these things pass along down the line. I'll never forget the first time I went searching for more Shi Cho videos on YouTube, and I found a guy in Brazil doing the exactly same form that Damon had did back in the day, with nothing in between those two clubs except ocean. And in fact, they had never really even talked to each other. So, you know, we have elements like that. We have elements from the movies, video games that we can use to influence us. But, you know, should I be tasked with pulling that? I don't have to do it. I just need to entertain others. That's my job. And if I can be influenced by you guys, by the things that Terra Prime creates, then we'll be influenced by that too.
Yeah, no, I think, and that was kind of my point too, is that, you know, there's lots of places that we can take inspiration from, and we've already had that back channel back to the movies, where now the movies are using in certain choreography scenes sabers like we use, because they throw ambient light into the things, and they can create those things. Now, of course, they're a little different than the way we use, but
yes. I'm looking forward to when they start stealing moves from you, Chad.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, technically, they can't steal anything from us, but yeah, that will be, you know, hey, hey, look, they ripped me off.
Well, there's these basic elements. I'm not sure if you guys talked about the episode of Star Wars Rebels that was last season, and Sabine gets the Darksaber, and she's being trained by Canon.
Yeah.
And we're watching
Yeah,
this
love that one.
animation of, okay, so here's a training form, and I'm looking at that going, that looks pretty familiar to some of the stuff we do.
Yeah, and yeah, I did a video on the previous episode with the lightsabers having weight and kind of sticking to each other a little bit. That whole dealie, which I'm probably going to do another video saying how that relates to blaster blocking, because probably blaster bolts are kind of attracted to the lightsaber. Anyway, see, now that's the kind of stuff that we do in this community. We take something that's ridiculous, something that doesn't work, and we make it work. And that's the whole thing. Jarrett, do you got something to chime in on here from?
Well, I'm going to go with the topic about whether or not, you know, these groups should be taking the 7 forms and adapting them versus kind of going with the core, you know, existence of them. Right. I think, this is going to be a little controversial, but I feel like the best way to do it is actually to kind of start from scratch. You can use the forms to an extent. They can be useful tools, but at its core, the forms were derived from characters. So you have to think of it that way, and you have to create the character first, and then kind of have their own fighting style be an extension of them, you know, because that's all these are. That's all these 7 things are. It's 7 characters that they extrapolated, you know, choreography from. They said, okay, this guy fights this way because he's this way. You know, you have to, if you really want to make good characters and good fights, you have to follow that same formula. You have to start with your character and what that character is and why they're that way. And, you know, as a result, how would they fight? How would they approach a fight? You know, are they young? Are they old? Are they experienced? Are they, you know, what kind of traits are quintessential to your character? You know, we know that Anakin is, you know, kind of brash, and he just wants to get things done and not be held back by, you know, limitations and stuff. So, you know, he's an aggressive type of fighter. So that, you know, became what, you know, how Form 5, you know, kind of sprang up. So that's I think what people should consider more so than trying to say, okay, you know, well, this guy's such and such and he uses Form 2 and then blah 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 blah. Like, those are specific characters. So, you know, trying to pattern off of that, you're not really giving yourself room to grow and create your own fight and character interactions.
I think one thing that makes it a little more difficult in the lightsaber thing is we have a relative kind of dearth of material to draw from. If you look at like Chinese movies or Hong Kong movies, you know, traditional old kung fu movies, they, especially in the 90s with the Hong Kong New Wave and these just really amazing pictures, they would deliver character exposition through fights and, you know, the different fights, but they had just tons and tons and tons of culturally recognizable things to draw from. We have 7 forms at this point, and those aren't really fleshed out anywhere. You know, like, which is funny because I figured that once we started doing something like that, other people would try. But I haven't seen like anything much. But there you go.
I think it's interesting to consider where the 7 forms come from, right? So here is, you know, what's his name? Reynolds West, right? You know, so he publishes the first article about the 7 forms in a fan magazine. I mean, before that, he had mentioned it in one of the books that he wrote for Disney. He puts it in a fan magazine. What the 7 forms are doing is they're trying to take this fight choreography and make it legible to the audience. The movie's already out there. Didn't do critically well, right? You're talking it up in a fan magazine saying, how can we get people into this? How can we make it relatable to them? Well, I'm going to create a body of lore like those guys in Hong Kong already have, but we don't have. So I'm going to artificially start retrospectively creating that lore, and it's going to make what were, you know, not horribly well received movies always by the fans. It's going to begin to make it legible and put layers of meaning into it. And you know what? The amazing thing was that it worked. The thing that I think is most interesting about the 7 forms, and I mean, as a practicing martial artist, I do not think about the 7 forms when I spar. No. I do not think about the 7 forms when I go to class and I practice technique. But when I think about the world of Star Wars, I think the forms are fascinating because they are a mechanism by which we take, you know, history and inject invented history into something that otherwise does not have history, right? We have like 10,000 years of imaginary history in the evolution of these forms. That's all spelled out from ancient days of proto-sabers all the way up to 100 Years of Darkness and what goes on after that. And then we have video games that, you know, flush it out more, and we have novels that flush it out more. And the one thing that I have learned as I study martial arts is that people love history. Now, it doesn't have to be real history. It's better if it's made up, actually, than if it's real, because real history is too messy and too complicated. But people love this idea, this feel of ancientness. They feel that they love that feel. They can get drawn into this. And so I think we actually owe, what is his name again? Dr. David West. Reynolds West. Yeah, I mean, we owe him a big debt of gratitude because, you know, he gave us, you know, in this community, something that's really phenomenal advertising. It's easy for people to get infatuated with this idea and to get drawn in by this idea. And hey, that's what like pseudo history mythology always does in the martial arts.
Absolutely.
And every martial art has pseudo-history mythology, you know.
Right. And that's how I've kind of viewed this stuff as I've come through it, is that the forms as described are the myths like now. I mean, it's completely analogous to real life martial arts. I mean, most of the stuff that you hear about Kung Fu is BS. It just didn't happen. It's complete.
They never burned the Shaolin Temple. The Shaolin Temple is fine. Never burned.
Yeah. I mean, there's history mixed in with some of this stuff, but yeah, that's how it is. Now, I will say this: it did work a lot, because I cannot name 3 movies that I dislike more that I watch as much as as those movies. So they did something. But anyway, yeah, no, I agree. Totally, is that adds a layer of something to it. And while we can completely nerd out on this one aspect of the universe, I think it serves the whole universe. Just like Weta Workshop proved with the Lord of the Rings stuff, by adding details that you will never see on screen, right? Mm-hmm. Like the stuff that they did on the inside of the armor, just to make it authentic. You know, just so that the actor could look at it and go, oh, okay, this is like real armor. And then it translates.
Right. And so, like, Ben, what's the publication date on the cover of Star Wars Insider when it was released?
Yeah.
That is October 2002.
Right
October
after
2002.
Episode 2?
Yeah, right after episode 2. And right after the release of the Master's replica hilts.
Oh, there you go.
If I can throw in one recent discussion, I posted this up on the Terra Prime Learners in Exile page this week. Pablo Hidalgo is one of... Yep.
Greg, I think we lost you for a second there, Greg.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, so we have this concept that this could be a thing that we could bring into the real world right as, you know, the master replicas are starting to come out, right as people are starting to grab them and go, well, we could form a club. So it's right there, right from the beginning. Even if you had all these other things to look at, here's a guy who gave it terminology.
Yeah.
And you can't say how valuable that is for an idea for people to gel around and come together upon.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. That's why we
have something like there right at the founding of a whole bunch of clubs around the world is great.
Yeah. And Craig,
it might have been somebody else.
Right. Craig, you were saying.
So a couple of points. First point, I think just by the fact that the past 20 minutes has been spent talking about the forums and that they also started roughly around the same time as Sabering happened, I think kind of tells you that it has formed a major cornerstone of this community. Certainly no groups have tried to develop their own version. Certainly no idiot has written a book about the damn thing or has a blog currently going on bitching about it. Never happened, and I pity the poor sucker. Anyway, I think to answer Jared's question, actually, well, first let me add this, because this happened just this week. Pablo Hidalgo, who is a part of the Star Wars continuity team for Disney. So he is where the buck stops when it comes to talking about canons. Recently posted this tweet on July 31st, just a couple of days ago. Lightsaber forms. Writers who created them reverse engineered from watching the film fights, aren't actually in the films themselves. So going back is that they're not actually in the movies, and that they were thrown in by, it's a writing term. so I agree with a lot that's being said. I think that, and to also parrot Greg, because I also come from a choreography background on this, is that we can do it both ways. I think that the forums will always exist in the community, and I think that for the past 10 years, it has served as a wonderful magnet to the martially inclined, basically to go, this is interesting. What can I do with this? How can I make this work? Or how can I bring what I know to it? That's going to happen consistently. As far as making new systems go, definitely, let's do it. I'm actually going to post up that tweet onto our live chat, so in case anyone wants to see it, making sure I'm not, crap, it's not going to let me post it. Anyway, I'll figure it out. If you want to go to Terra Prime, the Terra Prime Live Learners in Exile, I will post the link there.
Here, I can find it here on our Learners in Exile thing here.
I just put it in our chat.
Yeah, here we go.
Just because I want there to be proof.
Right.
Because someone will say, "Well, that doesn't exist." No, it exists.
It's amazing how. Oh
yeah, go.
It's amazing how people seize upon that and go, well, it's as if the 7 forms predates these movies, and in a way it does, because they're drawing upon these martial arts analogies, but on the other hand, people talk about it like it's a fixed idea. I mean, maybe it was something already floating in their heads that Luke Skywalker fights in this particular way, so it's funny how they'll I'll have somebody come into our choreography club and they'll say, well, I want to fight this particular way because this particular character does it, and my character was a apprentice of theirs back in the day. It's like, just stop right there. Do you understand how these concepts came into being? And then I start talking to them about, well, like the magazine article that Ben held up, and sometimes they'll listen to you, and other times they'll just keep talking back. So it is what it is. But yeah, play it both ways, especially if you're the choreography. I mean, in the martial arts world, it starts becoming a little. You have these dependency chains that are like, well, should we really try and do it that way because it's going to affect everything else, and where the choreographers kind of get off scot-free and they can have their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's true. There is a toll that we have to pay to reality and practicality when we're trying to apply this in the way that we are, and that's the thing. I think we've been around and we've kind of established enough stuff along with the forms, and I don't think we're ever going to totally get rid of the forms unless something crazy happens or anything like that. But branching out into other things that are not necessarily so connected to these forms is something that you would never have been able to do in 2012, because who would recognize it? Like you said, the forms are, as I was saying, touchstones. It's like, oh, I know what that is. I don't know what, I don't know what Republican Dada means, but, oh, Shicho, there you go.
Yeah.
And if you can, really encourage a kind of commonly known language, or even a few of them, to go between, that helps the community because it helps people talking with each other. So, I mean, while the forms themselves are not, nor were they ever intended to be, fully formed, as you said, Greg, set and static ideas, they are, I think, pretty important and pretty you know, a pretty big signature of our community, at least. And perhaps we have identified the actual beginning of this community in some sort of official sense with the publication of that article. Because without that article, pretty much nothing after that is going to happen.
Yeah, that kind of set the wheels in motion, and then other things started adding more detail and more detail and more detail for people like Pablo to manage in the story group. Just reading the Wikipedia, God bless that resource, article on something like Shicho, and looking at the legends, and then just going down and looking at all the resources that they cite. Well, this term was first used here, then it was used in trading cards, then it was used in this particular book. Just going back and tracing that backwards is entertaining in itself.
Yeah, it's the most effective evil viral marketing campaign ever, right? You know, I think it actually, you know, kind of had an impact on the Star Wars universe as well as on our own community. And I do think you could make an argument that this is the beginning of the community. Because, you know, when you get to Craig's example of, well, we've got the group in Sicho that's doing, or sorry, the group in Brazil that's doing Damon Honeycutt's Sicho, and we're doing Damon Honeycutt's Sicho in New York State still, and the two groups have never talked to each other, but we're united by a common physical practice. I mean, that's like almost the definition of nationalism. That's Benedict Anderson in Imagine Communities. I mean, literally, that is how, you know, big organizations have tried to put together national identities before. So yeah, this is actually kind of powerful, and it's a little scary that it managed to take off on its own this effectively, this quickly. There were a lot of reformers in China in the 1930s who were trying to get people to do this, who couldn't get it done quite this successfully, you know?
Yeah, that's a good thing to mention, because that's one of the driving factors in my impetus for doing any of this, is that old Republican idea of fitness through martial arts, because my teacher was from that era. So that's what he espoused. That's, you know, what he was all about. And he unfortunately died before he saw the invention of the internet. And I'd like to think that he would like understand this and do that, because he was always on us for to spread the stuff. He was my Tai Chi teacher, and he recorded himself on video, a video which he gave away for free to anybody who came to his class, which was also free. He taught me everything, you know, for nothing. And that video had this little thing. It says, as long as you give credit, and as long as you extend this message to the next person you give this video to, you are free to distribute it any way you wish. And that's essentially how you know, the Creative Commons and how we're kind of working that way.
It's open source.
Yes, right, exactly. And that's the thing, you know, you have to find ways to modernize things. You have to find ways to get people involved in it, and this is a great way to do it. It's not only a great way to get, you know, to popularize these arts and get people active and all that, but it's a great way to like reinvigorate people's practice who do arts. Like it's made my practice that much more fun, because I have this thing that is constantly evolving in a way that my other martial art is not, you know, because it's so new. Yeah. So, well, we're here at the end of the hour. Does anybody have anything they want to say before we sign off for the evening here?
I have a couple things. One is just due to this discussion and some recent events, I have picked up my old notes on preparing the next list of clubs, so we can learn where the next wave is coming from. And so I've started that project again.
Nice.
And of course, you guys are always welcome to follow the group that I help run in Central Pennsylvania, Capital City Jedi.
Yeah, I think we do. At least I do. I think the page does. I'll check, make sure on that. But very cool. And stick around after the show. Maybe we can help you out on that project too, because I know it's big.
Okay.
We'll see if we can't, because that's exactly the kind of stuff that we like to see happening. Anyway, so I guess that is it for us. So we will end it there. We will be back in 2 weeks for our final show of the summer. So join us on that one. Thank you all for tuning in. If you're watching here, if you're watching after the fact, thank you for watching. Until next time, we will see you. Have a great day. Happy sabering.